I snorted Crystal Light once on a dare. You know that Kool-Aid mix? Crystal Light.
Straight aspartame.
Never do that.
Hello and welcome to the Nerdmasters. Today's segment is going to be Faceoff, where we take two games or competing platforms or really anything we feel like talking about and compare them to one another to figure out which one is the best. So this week we're going to be talking about Streets of Rage and Final Fight. Yes, we know it's been done to death, but we're going to beat that dead horse anyway.
Let's kick
And
that
Mike
dead
is
horse
gonna
a couple
start-
more times.
That's right. Beat the shit out of the dead horse. And Mike is going to start us off.
Alright, so first of all, I just want to dispel the argument that Streets of Rage copies Final Fight. Yeah, I know there's a couple of characters that are very similar in the two of them, but they all copy Double Dragon, so fuck off with that. But so anyway, I think my most fondest memories of both of these games are really what Final Fight was the arcade. I used to love playing Final Fight in the arcade. Always used Hagar, and you know the music was awesome, the graphics were sick, and you know when it was ported to the Super Nintendo, I was pretty excited for that to come out, and I was severely disappointed because of the fact that it wasn't two players. And that severely limits the facts in this argument here. Let's be honest, Streets of Rage was a two-player beat-em-up that came out for the Genesis that had unbelievable music made by Yuzo Koshiro. I mean, you cannot top the music in that game. Blasting it from giant Kenwood speakers in my brother's room when I was growing up. The music was sick. It was so sick to the point where that Yuzo Koshiro actually played at MagFest this year. Like club music, it was like playing Streets of Rage music and doing a whole.
He's been doing that for years.
Yeah, and he did it in the United States for the first time at MagFest. So it was fucking awesome. So, in my opinion, it's not even close. Streets of Rage blows Final Fight out of the water on almost every single level. You could argue that maybe Streets of Rage, the first one, wasn't as good as perhaps Final Fight Arcade, but maybe even then that's questionable. But Streets of Rage 2 blows all of those other games out of the water. It's not even close. What do you think, Ryan?
So yeah, the music between these two games cannot be compared. Streets of Rage is definitely the better of the two. But when you come to graphics, you have to consider that Final Fight started out as an arcade game. And it was, I loved it as a kid. I mean, as Mike said, it was one of my first beat-em-ups that I remember playing in the arcade, Capcom beat-em-ups. But we have to compare the console versions, right? So the Super Nintendo Final Fight versus Streets of Rage on the Genesis. And so Final Fight is an arcade port, and whereas Streets of Rage was built from the ground up to be on a console. So that's one of the reasons why it's probably two-player. The Super Nintendo is limited, so that's why it's only a one-player game. The sprites are way too big. It's slower. It's not as it's a slower game. It's just not as fun, not as action-packed. The music isn't as lively. You know, and not to mention, in order to get the best arcade port, you have to go to a second console, right, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about that in a second. for me, I got to start with my own personal experience too, though. First, I didn't play Final Fight in the arcade. I didn't play Final Fight actually on the Super Nintendo until a few years after I had played Streets of Rage. I owned a Genesis. My younger brother eventually got a Super Nintendo. So for me, when I popped in Streets of Rage, the intro in that game is fantastic. It reminded me of the opening to a movie or a really good television show at the very least, and from then you're just completely captivated. You don't pay attention to the fact that the sprites are a little bit smaller. So I started out on Streets of Rage, and then when I played Final Fight on the Super Nintendo years later, still not having experienced the arcade version, it was a huge letdown. I mean, I'm playing this game, you know, hearing that this is the originator of beat-em-ups in the 16-bit era, and it was awful. I mean, the intro in it was terrible. Fat, muscly guy sitting at a desk with these god-awful sounds coming out of a computer.
Whoa. Don't talk shit about Hagar. Don't talk shit about Hagar, man.
Whatever.
Well, it's funny
you
when
just
you
like
say
him
that,
because you're the same height.
Yeah, well,
because
he's not as
I had
hairy.
kind of a similar experience because I played Final Fight as a kid in the arcade. I didn't get the Super Nintendo version until I was an adult. And yes, I was also very let down by what I saw. You know,
well,
it did
that's
not
because the first
bring
one
any nostalgic value.
Yeah, the first one was just bad. There's no two ways about it. And it got a little better with the second one, but like Mike said, by the time the second Final Fight came out for the Super Nintendo, they had shrunk the sprites a little bit on it so that you could have two-player co-op, which Streets of Rage already had. And with Streets of Rage 2, they increased the size of the sprites. So when you compare the two, they were very similar graphically. Streets of Rage, hands down, has the better music across the board. And as Ryan alluded to earlier, the best version of Final Fight was on the Sega CD, which, in my opinion, it's not just as good as the arcade. You could, in some respects, say it's better. It had, you know, better sounding music, I think, than the arcade, even though the arcade sounded a bit like the Genesis, which is a topic that Mike and I will talk about in a future episode, why that is. So, yeah, for me, hands down, without a doubt, is Streets of Rage. Granted, that's where I started out, but still, I don't see how anybody can really argue the point beyond saying that Final Fight was an arcade game. That's really the only argument you got.
Well, then Final Fight on the Super Nintendo, it only had two characters, right? They cut out Guy, and then the second
two
game
characters
was
and only one was playable.
Right, and only one was playable. It was only a one-player game, but Final Fight Guy, that was a two-player game, correct?
They cut out Cody.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, but it was only single player at a time.
Yeah.
You can only play one character.
What?
Right. So
there was no two-player co-op with that either.
There was Final Fight
Guy. There was no co-op.
There was Final Fight, and then there was Final Fight Guy, and Final Fight Guy cut out Cody, and it was still single player.
Oh my
No
god,
co-op.
That's ridiculous.
So for another $60, you pay for Guy. Enjoy.
Oh my god. So basically, it was just an entire new game with just a character swap?
That's it.
Yep.
Right?
Well,
Same
no, actually, the entire same game with a character swap.
It's the entire same game, right. Oh my god.
There might have been some changes here or there. I've never played Final Fight Guy.
Maybe that's what Capcom had in mind.
There's no two-player version. There's no two-player version of Final Fight on the Super Nintendo at all, right?
Not the first Final Fight, no.
Okay.
Nope.
Well, yeah. Streets of Rage wins simply because it's two-player. Come on
yeah,
now.
to sum that up,
Outright.
Mike, your opinion, obviously,
Outright.
Streets of Rage.
Not even fucking close. I love Streets of Rage all day, every day. I love Final Fight Arcade, don't get me wrong. Great game, but Streets of Rage kills it. Heads up.
You got a parting shot?
Yeah, alright. Every single character would beat the shit out of the characters from Final Fight in Streets of Rage.
There you go. That's a good parting shot. What about you, Ryan? Final thoughts?
Even the kangaroo.
Well, you know, there is that internet rumor about one of the games having a transsexual, one of the females, and that's actually an enemy in
Thank
Final
you,
Fight.
Ryan. We
So Streets of
appreciate
Rage
that.
wins because it's the one without the tranny.
Oh my god, that is not a can of worms I wanted to open in this video. Alright, thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to chime in, please leave a comment down below or leave a video response. You can also make recommendations for a future Face-Off. Again, leave a comment down below or leave a video response and we will include you in a future video. So, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you guys later.